question for you. How many of you have already seen a brief introduction to Virgin Galactic and know about it? Or, who hasn't? Who does not know about Virgin Galactic? Okay. Who does not know about X-Core? Would anyone be offended if Jim and I skipped our slide decks, which were introductions to those two companies, because we're having some technical difficulties, and went straight to just having a conversation? No one would be offended by saying. Good. All right, let's go for it.
That's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do anyway. Let me see if we can get a mic so we can just pass so we can...
Great. Great. I'll go sit over on the right side. Well, your bag's over there. I'll sit wherever you want. I'll sit here. I'll sit here.
I've got a mic.
Then I can duck behind this when they throw it in the net.
There you go. Thanks for accommodating us, everyone.
And I'll send slides to SEDS to put on the website so you won't be totally bored or whatever. Here we are.
All right, I'll just do the 1 minute introduction of each of us, and then maybe, hell, let's just move straight to the questions. That seems most interesting to me. I'm happy to babble. I could
Why don't you talk
babble
a few
for a long
minutes about
time.
Virgin and how you're doing?
Sure.
And then I'll
Do
sort
the
of
same.
give them a quick intro to X-Core
Yeah.
as well.
Okay, well, hi, I think I know essentially all of you in the audience, but for those of you I haven't met yet, I look forward to meeting you later in the evening and throughout the weekend. My name's Will Pomerantz. I'm Vice President for Special Projects at Virgin Galactic. I am also a SEDS alum, having run a chapter for a couple of years and remained involved with the program ever since. Always happy to speak to SEDS students, whether at conferences or offline. You all said you all raised your hands and said you've heard of Virgin Galactic, but in case there's anyone on the web stream that hasn't, we are a private company that is building spaceships to take you and your experiments into space. So what we did is licensed the technology that built Spaceship One. That was the first ever privately built spacecraft to carry human beings into space. It flew 3 times in the summer and the fall of 2004. It now hangs in the Air and Space Museum. And it was really the existence proof that a small company of dedicated individuals who had only private funding, no government funding, could safely send people to space and bring them back. That whole vehicle program went from a drawing on a napkin to hanging in the world's most visited museum for about $27 million. And for that amount of money, it didn't just fly people into space, it flew people into space repeatedly. And that's a pretty big deal because I think in the space industry, so much of what we do in every aspect of the space industry is driven by the cost of access to space. And so much of the cost of access to space is driven by the flight rate of access to space. If you were a fan of the space shuttle program, if you followed that closely, you're probably already aware that the space shuttle program was going to cost a few $1 billion a year, whether we flew it or not, because almost all of the cost associated with that program was the cost not of exotic rocket propellants, it was the cost of people. It was the cost of the army of engineers and technicians, all of whom were highly skilled and patriotic, but cost a lot of money to keep that vehicle in flying condition or to get it back into flying condition after every flight. By contrast, Spaceship One and now Spaceship Two are ready to fly, maybe as soon as the day after. It's just come back from space. Now, we're not doing the space shuttle's job, we're going suborbital. It's a lot easier to be ready for that. But that was also baked into the cake. It was a fundamental part of the design of these vehicles. Let's build something that we can fly today and fly the same thing again tomorrow and fly the same thing again the day after that. So we, and by we I speak broadly, I mean both Virgin Galactic and our friends at Scale Composites, have built the first vehicle pair. We use an air launch system, so we have both an aircraft that carries our spaceship up to altitude and the spaceship itself. We built the vehicle, the first pair, the first of each vehicle. They're in the flight test program now. As many of you have heard me say, we're essentially done with the flight test program for the mothership, White Knight 2. She's flown like 103 or 104 times. Now it is basically done. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The spaceship was built second, so she is not quite as far along, but coming along nicely. She's just finished her subsonic flight test program a few months ago and is getting ready to start supersonic flight test program. We try not to put firm dates on when we're going to fly, because the real answer is we're going to fly when we're damn good and ready. We need a vehicle, as I said, that can go to space. It can do it routinely, can do it affordably, also has to do it safely, and has to do so comfortably. If our first customers come down and they didn't like the ride very much, that's not good for business, especially when your first customer is Sir Richard Branson. as it is for us. We want him to come home all smiles and to give us a nice pat on the back rather than a stern talking to. So we're well on our way to that. Looks like flight operations could be, not too much more than a year and a half, 2 years away. That's a number that's thrown around a lot in this industry, 2 years away, and we certainly have been part of that trend in the past. But as Jim was saying to some people before we got started here, you can see that this is real. The vehicles exist. You can walk up and touch them if we let you. You can certainly see pictures and video. Come out to Mojave, we bring them out on the flight line relatively frequently because we're flying them a lot. And that's the way that you get to these affordable and frequent operations. We have a pretty long order list. In fact, we've now sold more tickets to space than there have been people to space. We are also starting to take on customers who are, hey, it's your slides. Oh my God. Our vehicle is not that one, as most of you recognize. We've sold more tickets to space than there have been people to space. We're at 545, getting close to 550. The total number of human beings in space throughout history is 528, I think, as of today. We're also starting to sell to researchers. A few of you were at the panel just before this one that was about that. I get personally very excited about that. I don't really work on the space tourism side. I work on other things. My background is in science, and I think it's extremely important that we have the ability for more of you to fly your payloads and yourselves into space more often. It's hard to do a whole lot of science if you only have 500 experimentors. You need 5,000 experimentors or 5 million experimentors who could do all kinds of different things. And you need young people as well as veterans doing it. And then last thing I'll say before I hand over to Jim is just a few months ago we announced our first orbital program. Now this is not for human astronauts but for payloads. It's called Launcher One. We can take about 500 pounds to orbit for prices below $10 million. And what we think we're doing with that is really for the first time giving the small satellite community, and small somewhat of a hand-wavy term because everyone defines it differently, but giving the small sat community a dedicated ride to space at a price that they can afford. A number of you from knowing several of you from talking to others of you earlier today, I know a lot of you have worked on CubeSats. CubeSats are fantastic. They're great ways for you as young professionals and as students to get experience. Increasingly, they're great ways for people to get actual substantive results, whether that's for a civil agency, for military, for university, or for private enterprises. But there are a lot of limitations on CubeSats, as many of you have figured out. Even if you built one, that doesn't mean you get to fly it. When you can fly it, you can probably fly it pretty cheaply, maybe even for free, but you don't have any choice of when it's going to fly. You probably don't have any choice about what orbit it's going to go to, or at least not much choice. And also, the bigger payload on that rocket that is kindly sharing a ride with you is going to put a lot of limitations on you. So if you wanted to have propellant on board your CubeSat, that's probably not going to happen in most piggyback launch situations. By contrast, if you've bought the launch yourself because it's at a much smaller price point that you can affordably take on, you're in control. You launch the day you want to the orbit you want to, with whatever you want on board, within reason, obviously, for all those things. And we think that has the potential to be quite transformative. We've already signed up a number of commercial customers for that who have payloads ranging from sort of 3U CubeSats to things that are going to fill up our entire payload fairing and be close to 500 pounds. I think there's a real market demand for all those things. So perhaps I'll stop there and hand over to Jim.
Okay, how do I control the slides? Is this it? Does this work? Wow. Okay. No, that didn't work. There, oh God, it's gonna be one by one. Now it went.
It's still up on their screen. This screen is
This screen is is finicky. Okay. Back. Let's just skip it. Why don't you just blank it so it's not up? And I can just sort of talk people through the basic message anyways. So,
webcasts.
Oh, okay. X-Corps was founded in 1999. For those of you who have noticed that not all commercial space companies are successful, it's an important lesson that X-Corps was founded by 4 people who were part of the propulsion team of another company, which failed in the 1990s, called Rotary Rocket Company. And they were developing propulsion systems for the Roton. And when Rotary failed, they took some of their ideas, they bought their intellectual property from the company, and they went off and they started working on cheaper, faster, better rocket engines. Scaled Composites, of course, is probably the most innovative airframe company in the world, designing with innovative designs of airplanes, aircraft, and things that can fly through the atmosphere. X-Core took a slightly different approach, and what they wanted to focus on was highly reliable, reusable, robust, and very cheap to operate liquid propulsion systems, rockets, entirely using non-toxic components, no solids, and and more importantly, none of the toxic storable propellants that are sometimes used in satellites and even were used on the space shuttle. That said, they went about, slowly building up with SBIR contracts and things like that, developing two different versions of a rocket-powered plane. One was the Easy Rocket, which they took a Burt Rutan Long EZ and flew that at Oshkosh with two 400-pound liquid oxygen alcohol engines in it. Then they built, for a private customer, they developed the X-Racer, which had a liquid oxygen, liquid kerosene engine in it, which ended up flying 7 times in one day, which is the most a rocket-propelled airplane has ever flown in that amount of time. It was a subsonic airplane. It was based on the Velocity aircraft, but it showed that you could turn around a rocket plane in as little as 10 minutes from landing to takeoff, which is get to that sort of reusability, then you can get to the sort of cost, the price points that you need to get when this market evolves. And that's sort of where X-Core has come from. If you look at the history of the automobile industry, some companies were named so-and-so automobiles, but a lot of companies were named after the motors in them. Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Chrysler Motors, okay? And so that was the approach X-Core's taken. Our neighbors down the street in Mojave, Virgin Galactic, are building a bigger, more capable system. But the important thing that both companies have shown is the kinds of innovation you can get at the suborbital level, which is easier and cheaper to work with and doesn't require billions or hundreds of millions of dollars to start with. It can be done with tens of millions or perhaps $100 million to start with. The technologies that are possible out of that do in fact lead to orbital access over time. And so Virgin's already showing that with Launcher 1. The same technologies that X-Core has been doing, using with piston pump, piston pump rocket technology has been looked at very favorably by the United Launch Alliance, and we've been working with them several years to apply our piston pump technology to upper stage engines for EELV class rockets. So even little X-Core engines can, 20,000-pound engines could be useful for launching, multi-hundred million or billion-dollar satellites all the way to orbit. So that's been a very important thing for the industry, because we have, over the last 50 years, sort of over-concentrated space transportation in too few companies doing too few innovative things, not reducing the cost, prices keep going up, there's fewer payloads, fewer launches, and you get this, vicious cycle of over-concentration and price inflation, and you don't get the sort of dynamic, competitive environment we have, for example, in the computer industry. And that really is the vision that I think Virgin and X-Core and frankly all the other suborbital companies are working on is, none of them just want to work on suborbital systems, okay? We all want to build systems that can carry people and payloads to orbit and eventually beyond, but we wanted to start where we could start and afford to start and learn by doing things smaller and slower and build up over time, and not try to say, well, if some person isn't going to give us $1 billion to develop our perfect spaceship, we're not going to try. And you will learn in your own ways that in whatever technical field or business field you want to go into relating to space, and I hope you all do go into space, you know, whatever area you're working on, whether it's a power system or a kind of propulsion or a sensor or something like that, you know, find ways to try it out on a small scale. Find ways to, you know, don't try to prove the whole hypothesis in the first experiment. Find a way to try out part of it, you know, the part of it that you could work on first, that you could afford to work on first, that someone will give you a chance to work on first. And then go from there and build and learn and build and test and build and test and redesign and test and test and test and learn by doing. Learning by reading out of a book or reading an analysis or doing computer-aided design is not the way to do space. The way to do space and to really get it cold and to really know what you're doing and know how it works is to actually build things and try them. Hopefully companies like Virgin and X-Corps will make it possible for more people to fly experiments and even students to fly experiments in space, and eventually students to fly themselves into space to work with their experiments. And that's certainly, I think, the goal that both Will and I have. One last bit of news about X-Corps is that X-Corps is growing right now. Just as Virgin is perfecting their Spaceship 2 and having perfected the White Knight 2, we are in the middle of building Lynx. We're building it right now in Mojave, which has been our headquarters. We are moving the R&D operations of X-Corps from California, frankly due to the business climate in California, to Midland, Texas. We'll be moving there in the spring of next year. And if the flight test program isn't for Lynx Mark 1 isn't complete by then we will stop the flight test program and move it with the company to Texas. We're opening up our new headquarters, our R&D headquarters and flight test center in Midland. We will continue to fly operationally the Lynx Mark 1 and then the Lynx Mark 2 in Mojave as a West Coast base. We really like Mojave, we really like the spaceport, and we're very close friends with a lot of the people in the industry there. We don't leave Mojave, move anyone out of Mojave gladly. But the fact is that we needed to find a better place to go off and do R&D with a more solid business base. The other thing we've announced is that we're going to open up a manufacturing and operating location at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It's not absolutely decided that we'll be on Kennedy Space Center grounds. It probably will. We're looking at locations. We're working actively with Space Florida. We're getting some help from the state, and the folks at KSC are very excited about our coming there. And I think the tourism community is very interested in having people fly to space every day from the Kennedy Space Center, from Spaceport USA. So we are hiring. There are job opportunities right now on our website. I would encourage you to go to xcorps.com, look at them. I would absolutely recommend that you apply for internships. Unlike some companies, we actually require 6 months because that's how long it takes for you to really start to feel part of the company and building things and really engaging in the technical work. And you will end up working across all sorts of different projects. You won't get stovepiped on one little project that's like a project for students. You'll be working in technical reviews of engines or vehicles or flight tests or whatever. So you will have a lot of fun. If you talk to some of our former interns who are now employees, who went to Embry-Riddle or Purdue or some other universities, you'll see that it is definitely a way into the company. And finally, go break things. Go build things and test things and break things as students. Please don't just stay in the books or on the computers. Please go build and test things. It would probably be better if you didn't just build another hybrid rocket like a lot of college students do. Go find something you can play with that's innovative and different. and figure out, you know, some new thing or some way of trying something that no one's tried before. Build hardware, build software, do something real. That will help you in this industry more than anything else. It will particularly help you with XCOR because we don't hire rocket scientists, we hire rocket engineers. We hire people who actually want to build things. And come aboard and let's go to space. So there.
So let's do Q&A. We have your microphones, so just say them and I'll try and repeat them for anyone who didn't hear them and on the webcast. If anyone is either watching live or too shy to speak up, just tweet them with hashtag SV12 and I'll try and read them off. But I think we got half an hour and I'm hoping you'll have great questions. Otherwise, I'll just have to start asking Jim questions and your questions will be more exciting than mine. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was wondering what the greatest hurdles you've seen for both companies from original conception to where you are today. And then the second question for you, Will, is where the development is launcher one.
Okay, so two questions. One for both of us is what's been the biggest hurdle for the company from inception through today, and the second one was for both, or excuse me, was I guess just for us. What's the status of launcher one? So here, I'll hand to Jim first.
Money.
Oh, technical hurdle.
Oh.
Yeah,
sorry. We had to do a lot of work on aerodynamics to make sure we got the design right. We ended up flying in a hypersonic tunnel at Marshall, and we kept tweaking it, kept tweaking it, kept tweaking it, and added strakes and added some things and moved things a little bit, mainly because we didn't have Bert working for us. So we had to work on that. I think that was a big issue. The propulsion is just, we've been building engines and testing engines for 12 years now, so that wasn't as hard, but there were certainly a lot of work to do and a lot of learning to do along the way.
Let's see, for us it's probably a lot of little things rather than one big thing, and I think most of them are probably obvious and similar across a lot of the companies. A big part of it is integration. It's getting all these pieces that you've made work individually to work in harmony and to work every single time. I think for all of our companies, we need systems that are going to work. We are very safety-minded, as are the folks at XCOR and all these other things. We sometimes have a different approach to safety than NASA does, but that doesn't mean that we aren't obsessed with making these vehicles very safe. The blunt reality of it is that all these vehicles need to be orders of magnitude safer than the space shuttle was, or these businesses aren't going to handle themselves for very long. So making all those things, getting a propulsion system that doesn't just have enough thrust, but it meets all the stability requirements and it meets all the other requirements, etc. Fitting all the puzzle pieces together has been the challenge, I would say. Nothing that's insurmountable by any means, but it's why we need the smart people, and I should say we're hiring as well. In terms of Launcher One, we just started that program, obviously a little bit before we announced it, but it is a new program, and it's one that we're doing in-house. So whereas we hired Scale Composites to build White Knight 2 and Spaceship 2, we're hiring our own engineers. We have subcontractors, certainly, but we are the lead integrator and the lead designer for Launcher One, which is super exciting. And it also means that our team has grown a lot. When I joined Virgin Galactic, which was only 18 months ago, the number of people who actually had Virgin Galactic on their badge was probably 35 or 40, and I think we're about to pass 100, in addition to our now subsidiary TSC, which is well over 100 themselves. So we were very pleased to win a very competitively bid DARPA program called ALASA, which is for a very small, very inexpensive air-launched rocket, and that's driving our schedule in a lot of ways. If we hope to win that program, the next phase of it, which carries us through, maybe as many as a dozen or 2 dozen test launches, we have to be in flight around 2015. It's an aggressive schedule. Team, we've brought in a lot of people who have great experience. Not only the people that we already had on staff who come from backgrounds at Scale and TSC, but we brought people who have come from working on Pegasus and working on SpaceX and working on basically every rocket that's ever flown in this country, trying to get that right mix of gray beards and fresh eyes to give us the best perspective on it. So it's coming along. I don't know, we're maybe sort of just pre-PDR type level on the rocket, but moving very quickly and on schedule. And please, I go to the front and then the back.
How do you see the small sat market shaking out? SpaceX came out with Falcon 1 and they retired it. Lockheed Martin floated Athena for a while and that didn't really go anywhere. Orbital had some success with Pegasus. Where do you see the small sat launch market?
Great question. The question was, where do we see the small sat launch market going, especially given that other companies have tried launch vehicles in that sector and either withdrew from them or didn't have the market to sustain them. It is a little bit of a field of dreams. We are building it. We hope that they come kind of market. That is certainly the case. That said, we're super confident, actually. When we announced this vehicle launcher one at the Farnborough Air Show this summer, and George Whitesides and Steve Isakowitz, which is our CEO and our CTO, came to me and gave me the job of trying to sign up a few customers before we had even announced this vehicle, much less started building it. And I said, well, I better start preparing my resume because that's going to be impossible. I wasn't sure if I could do it. We ended up signing up 5, announcing 4 of them publicly. One of them is in the room, Planetary Resources, and please go see Chris's talk later today, and also pigeonhole him later. He's one of the most interesting people at the conference. So we signed up those 5 customers, which would keep us probably at our saturation rate for where we are certainly supply limited rather than demand limited for a pretty long time, if all of their projections hold true and the other companies that we've signed up. The difference is we have to be extraordinarily disciplined about cost. If you take the example of Pegasus, when Pegasus was first announced and when they started working on it, I think even when they first flew it, it was designed to be what? A $6 million launch vehicle, I want to say, six or seven. If you try to buy a Pegasus now, you're probably spending about $30 million. Now it is the Pegasus XL, so they've had some improvements of capability, but I think a lot of that cost increase was not driven by capability increase, it was driven by process increase. Because their sole customer effectively was NASA, and NASA places a lot of burdensome technical requirements on it, and when they're your only customer, you can't say no. We are building this almost entirely from private funding. We do have a small amount of money from DARPA. We are going to be very disciplined, and that means that we have to have the guts to tell a customer no. When they want us to add a part, and that part is going to raise the basement level of our price up to a point where we don't have any of our customers, we're not going to do it. So I hope that if we do that and we keep the sort of the quantum unit at which you can buy spaceflight in the single-digit millions rather than the double-digit millions, I think there's a pretty substantial market there. Jim?
Let me just speak. X-Core has a design for an upper stage cowling that goes on top of the links that will allow for a small expendable 2-stage rocket to launch a smaller payload than Launcher 1 will, on the order of 10 kilograms or so to LEO. And the real question is going to be what turn out to be the sizes, the capacities, and the demand level for small sats, and how do they shake out? You know, a very smart man named Bill Gates once said that 640K ought to be enough for anyone. You know, I suspect there isn't a phone in the room that's less than 640 meg. So the question is what can people do? We have talked about much lower cost access to space for small payloads for a long time. And everyone keeps going to, and you are now seeing so much pressure on launch costs that you're seeing a real vigorous discussion going on about secondary payloads and trying to open up more secondary payload opportunities on larger rockets so that these small things can get aboard, because the existing small providers, Pegasus mainly and Minotaurs from Orbital, are just too expensive. And they got expensive partly because of government requirements creep, but also just because they became more expensive. There were failures. They were more expensive to fly, fewer payloads, and if you're a PI, why not propose a mission that flies on a Delta with the reliability of that, or now on a Falcon 9? If you're a scientist, there's always pressure, more and more pressure to do bigger satellites, more capability, add another instrument, and you get the Battlestar Galactica effect. You know, the question is once you really do put a satellite on someone's desk, when you really do make it possible for someone to launch their own bird and do something with it for some period of useful amount of time, you know, whether it's a remote sensing satellite or a network of small comsats for totally private networking applications, you know, who knows? We just don't know whether, you know, will people find out something that really useful and profitable they can do with 10 kilograms or 100 kilograms, or does it take 1,000 kilograms? In which case, Launcher 1 has to get bigger, okay? And X4 has to build a much bigger system to ever begin talking about launching that much. So that's the challenge, but the market will show. I mean, we just have to start flying things.
Hi.
Sure.
A few of us were in a workshop recently that was about. Hi. A few of us were in a workshop recently that was about training in the suborbital spaceflight industry, and we were talking a lot about whether companies such as Virgin or X-Corp would prefer to train spaceflight participants in-house or kind of let third-party companies handle the training. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. So X-Corp hasn't made a decision. We have a general sales agent, Space Expeditions Corporation, that's also tied to our partners in Curacao. That's is leasing a Lynx to operate there on the Caribbean. We're working out those details, and if you have some interesting ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Virgin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's probably multiple answers, and it differs by market segment for us. For sort of the classical Virgin Galactic space tourism customer, if you look at those customers, a big part about what they're buying is it's the full experience. It's not just a space flight, it's joining the family of astronauts, it's joining the Virgin Galactic brand, it's the association with Sir Richard and with this beautiful building. So I think that for them, there will be a fairly, the minimum requirements of what you absolutely need to go to space and enjoy it, we will address. Now that said, for a lot of those people, they may want additional things. For example, they may want to learn to take a class on, you know, photography or something like that. I think most of our passengers will not be spending their time looking to their viewfinder, certainly not on their first flight, but maybe someday there will be sort of extra add-on things, or where they want to have even more time in a parabolic flight just to make sure they're really proficient at moving around in that. So there's probably a support market there. Alternatively, we are also going to fly people who are researchers. They are going to need a very different type of training, and I suspect that there will probably be a lot of opportunities for other organizations to train them on how to do their experiment competently and comfortably, because that won't be something that we've built into our program, because it'll be so different from researcher to researcher. I'll go back to questions from the audience in a second, but there was one for Twitter. Are there sort of ITAR or export control restrictions on who can buy tickets for rides on these vehicles? There are some. Hopefully they will be less and less as time goes on. I think for the foreseeable future, you know, if you're from North Korea or Iran, you're probably out of luck on any of these vehicles. But hopefully we can get the list of individuals who are not able to buy a ticket to come to the US and fly on one of these vehicles. Hopefully we can restrict that down as much as possible. There will be yet other restrictions on the use, on taking any of these vehicles and operating them from another nation. But I hope that also that those are able to be overcome.
Yeah, I think all the companies have been able to get some approval. It's not a blanket approval, but an approval for a set of activities that are associated with the spaceflight experience, the suborbital spaceflight experience, and gotten those things sort of generally approved by the State Department as not a major transfer of knowledge. Ultimately, we just need to get generic spacecraft off the munitions list, so that suborbital vehicles, which aren't really spacecraft because they're not, certainly not satellites, okay, are not just sort of included by just sort of like the radiation effect, or, you know, just, we got sort of thrown on, you know, ad hoc, even though, you know, we're not satellites. Hopefully that will happen, if not in legislation this year, hopefully next year. Next question. There you go.
It had been mentioned in the spring by Steve Isakowitz that Richard Branson had wanted to develop point-to-point spaceflight. Is there anything going on in that area at Virgin now?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
The question was, Richard Branson has mentioned in the past wanting to do point-to-point travel, and are we working on that? We're definitely extremely interested in it. That is something that Sir Richard is quite passionate about. It's something that a lot of us at the company are passionate about it. And you sort of notice there was a Spaceship 1, there is now a Spaceship 2. That implies a sequence. We have some ideas about what is Spaceship 2, or Spaceship 3 and Spaceship 4 and beyond. And at some point those will become point-to-point vehicles. In fact, that was a portion of the impetus behind why we're doing Launcher 1. It allows us to sort of play in some of that trade space and learn some lessons that we will in the future apply to a point-to-point vehicle, whether directly or indirectly. So definitely we're thinking about it. We will get there. That's not something we're going to debut next year or anything like that. It's much more difficult to get a vehicle that you could put into a useful point-to-point service. Now, if you want to do a demonstration and go from Mojave to Spaceport America, that may be something that's relatively near term in terms of technical feasibility. If you want to talk about routine service from New York to London, much less from New York to Shanghai, that's 20 times more energy or so. That's also, you're no longer just dealing with the FAA in the United States. You're dealing with at least 2 FAA equivalents. Maybe you have to deal with overflight rights depending on your sonic boom signature and things like that. So it gets a lot harder. It's farther down the road, but it will happen.
There was a question actually from a lady a few rows back. There you are.
Hi, my name is Carly. I was wondering what you plan to do with profit of your company. Is that mostly going into maintenance of your vehicles, or do you plan on creating new vehicles with that profit?
X-Corps is going to plow its profit back into the company and develop ever more increasingly capable vehicles. To sort of address the question that was just asked, X-Corps has no plans whatsoever to do point-to-point transportation. Okay? That is because the energy requirements of doing long-distance point-to-point transportation are the same energy requirements as going to space. And last I checked, you get a lot more money all the way to orbit. And you make a lot more money flying to orbit than you do flying from New York to Shanghai. So we would prefer to be in the profitable industry of flying people to orbit. And only when we run out of people who want to fly to orbit, as prices come down and down and down and down, will we want to try to compete with United Airlines or British Airways or anyone like that. Now, Sir Richard competes with those people in other spheres with different vehicles. So we'll let him. My concern, frankly, is that the suborbital industry becomes a target of the airline industry that sees us flying with a different regulatory regime than airplanes do. But airplanes are a 100-year-old industry. And we are a brand new industry, and we need a different regulatory standard, frankly, than commercial aviation, which is a very mature industry. So, eventually, a lot of these vehicles will make it possible to fly point to point. But if I see someone as the lobbyist for X-Corps, if I see someone in the company talking about point to point, I smack them. Okay, and you should smack Steve too, because all that does is get the companies in trouble with Congress. We should not be going there. And by the way, there was a recent Fox News Online story about X-Corps flying from New York to Tokyo. No. We're not doing that. The Lynx isn't going to do that. The vehicle after Lynx isn't going to do that. Could an orbital vehicle do that? Yes, but orbital vehicles aren't going to do that very quickly. Now, if the military wants to buy an orbital vehicle and do that, that's a separate question, but we're not going to be doing that anytime soon.
If Sir Richard is watching, I don't plan on smacking you.
I'm interested in the design challenges of the interior for both the aircraft. I understand that Virgin Galactic is taking insights from Virgin Atlantic's upper deck as well as Virgin America, but I'm sure over time you've experienced some challenges in your design of the interior, as well as it seems that they have to be somewhat of modular spaces to allow researchers as well as passengers into the same vehicle. Perhaps for both of you, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your insight on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we put a tremendous amount of thought into. At Virgin Galactic, we talk a fair amount about almost everything we're doing. Some might say too much. That is one area that we hardly talk about at all. It's the secret sauce in a lot of ways. But as you mentioned, we are learning lessons from our sister companies, the airlines. In fact, the gentleman who designed Virgin America, essentially everything that had to do with design for Virgin America, and who also was a contributor to the upper class deck on Virgin Atlantic, is now our head of design. And so he designs both what goes inside the spaceport and what goes inside of the spacecraft. It's a tough challenge because you need something that looks sexy, looks cool. These people have paid a lot of money and they're accustomed to a certain style of living, but also has to be extremely functional. You have to make sure that they are comfortable throughout what is, relative to a normal airplane ride, a pretty demanding physical experience. Not very demanding compared to a Soyuz ride, but by conventional airline standards, pretty demanding. So it is difficult, but as you can also imagine, it's pretty awesome, right? If you're a design engineer and your first career was working on vacuum cleaners for Dyson, as it was for this gentleman, and now you're designing the seats on a suborbital spaceship, I think he loves his job, and we love having him on board.
Hi, Nathan from X PRIZE Foundation. Presumably both of your companies will be competing for customers in both the human spaceflight arena and the science arena. Why is your vehicle going to be better than the person sitting to your side?
Wait, say that again? The last part?
Why is your vehicle going to be better than the person sitting to your side?
Oh, the answer is neither one of us know. Okay, we are addressing different aspects of the experience, different aspects of the value equation, and we're going to find out. I suspect, Lord willing, there are going to be an unbelievable level of demand for both kinds of experiences, okay? X-Core is offering a front seat ride. X-Core is giving you an astronaut experience, flying into space with a huge window right in front of your eyes as you go to space. Virgin is offering an incredible, exciting, passenger experience in space. They have a bigger vehicle. They can fly more people at the same time. We have a smaller vehicle. We can fly the vehicle more cheaply, okay? How that all works out in the economics of the marketplace and what people want to do, I have no idea. We both designed vehicles that we thought would work in the marketplace. That's the great thing about the competitive market is you get to try it, you get to find out. And, obviously the designers at X-Core thought they were taking the right approach. And I know that the people at Virgin thought they were taking the right approach. And, hopefully both will succeed and other companies will succeed as well, because the industry won't succeed and the marketplace won't evolve unless you've got multiple companies out there succeeding, earning revenue, plowing those profits back into new designs, new technologies, new concepts to make it even cheaper and more, these vehicles even cheaper and more capable, so that we can in fact dramatically lower the cost, not just of access to space, but the access to orbit, because that's going to blow the barn off everything. So.
Yeah, I agree entirely. They're at this point quite different vehicles. It's a different experience, different views out different windows. Some vehicles you have your family along, some vehicles you don't have to have your family along. These appeal to different people. And probably there are people who are interested in both experiences. So I see no reason why we couldn't both be successful at the same time.
Okay, so we'll take one more question.
Hi, thanks. So you mentioned United Airlines, American Airlines, British Airways. They buy aircraft from Boeing and Airbus predominantly. Could each of you sort of mention your company's take on your spacecraft? Right? So both you're building spacecraft, definitely Virgin wants to operate spacecraft. X-Cor's talked about wet leases and stuff. How do you see that playing out? Do you see someone sort of licensing your vehicles and operating them elsewhere?
Let me speak to that directly because that really is X-Cor's business model. X-Cor does not want to be in the space line business. Okay? That is not, our strength is not in the retail market, and that's not where we plan to go. We plan to design and build rockets and rocket-powered spaceships. And so we want to be the Boeing, not the United Airlines. I mean, we made that choice very early in the company, when the company was founded. And, you know, we will do what we have to do in terms of operating vehicles and supporting the operations of vehicles. A wet lease is simply a way of our providing the technical support to a customer that may not even be located in the United States, may be located externally, so that US personnel maintain technical control of the vehicle, but they provide all of the customer-facing experience. They provide the marketing, they provide the sales, they provide the training, they provide all that full experience stuff that Will was talking about. And they do it in different locations around the world, they do it in different ways, appealing to different people from different cultures. And they take the, it's not so much software around the hardware, it's more, you know, the very high order stuff that interfaces with the customers. That's not our strength. We are in the steak business, not the sizzle business.
This is a great illustration of why when people say that X-Corp and Virgin Galactic are competitors, I disagree. We're each doing different things. You have the companies building the craft and the companies operating the craft. I wouldn't say that we are the United Airlines of the space industry because I don't like United. we're the Virgin America of the space industry, which is something I really like about it. I enjoy that we're not a technology development company. We are an implementation, we're an operations company. We are pretty neutral. If there is a better solution out there, or if there is a complementary solution out there that adds to our capability set in a way that our customers are going to find interesting, which is the key point, we're all about it. We'll go ahead and we'll add that to the fleet if we can find commercially agreeable terms. There we go. So with that, I think we're getting the hook. So thanks. I'm glad we did a long question and answer session. These are always more fun. Thanks for your questions. White Knight 2, she's flown like 103 or 104 times now. It is basically done. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The spaceship was built second, so she is not quite as far along, but coming along nicely. She's just finished her subsonic flight test program a few months ago and is getting ready to start supersonic flight test program. We try not to put firm dates on when we're going to fly, because the real answer is we're going to fly when we're damn good and ready. We need a vehicle, as I said, that can go to space, it can do it routinely, can do it affordably, also has to do it safely, and has to do so comfortably. If our first customers come down and they didn't like the ride very much, that's not good for business, especially when your first customer is Sir Richard Branson, as it is for us. We want him to come home all smiles and to give us a nice pat on the back rather than a stern talking to. So we're well on our way to that. Looks like flight operations could be, not too much more than a year and a half, 2 years away. That's a number that's thrown around a lot in this industry, 2 years away, and we certainly have been part of that trend in the past. A quick question for you. How many of you have already seen a brief introduction to Virgin Galactic and know about it? Who hasn't? Who does not know about Virgin Galactic? Okay. Who does not know about XCore? Would anyone be offended if Jim and I skipped our slide decks, which were introductions to those two companies, because we're having some technical difficulties, and went straight to just having a conversation? No one would be offended by saying.
Good.
All right, let's go for it.
Because that's what we're going to do.
That's what we're going to do anyway. Let me see if we can get mics that we can just pass so we can...
Great. Great. I'll go sit over on the right side. Well, your bag's over there. I'll sit wherever you want. I'll sit here. I'll sit here.
I've got a mic.
Then I can duck behind this when they throw it to the center.
There you go. Thanks for accommodating us, everyone.
And I'll send slides to SEDS to put on the website so you won't be totally bored.
The privately built spacecraft to carry human beings into space. It flew 3 times in the summer and the fall of 2004. Now hangs in the Air and Space Museum. And it was really the existence proof that a small company of dedicated individuals who had only private funding, no government funding, could safely send people to space and bring them back. That whole vehicle program went from a drawing on a napkin to hanging in the world's most visited museum for about $27 million. And for that amount of money, it didn't just fly people into space, it flew people into space repeatedly. And that's a pretty big deal because I think in the space industry, so much of what we do in every aspect of the space industry is driven by the cost of access to space. And so much of the cost of access to space is driven by the flight rate of access to space. If you were a fan of the space shuttle program, if you followed that closely, you're probably already aware that the space shuttle program was going to cost a few $1 billion a year, whether we flew it or not, because almost all of the cost associated with that program was the cost not of exotic rocket propellants, it was the cost of people. It was the cost of the army of engineers and technicians, all of whom were highly skilled and patriotic, but it costs a lot of money to keep that vehicle in flying condition or to get it back into flying condition after every flight. By contrast, Spaceship One and now Spaceship Two are ready to fly, maybe as soon as the day after it's just come back from space. Now, we're not doing the space shuttle's job, we're going suborbital. It's a lot easier to be ready for that. But that was also baked into the cake. It was a fundamental part of the design of these vehicles. Let's build something that we can fly today and fly the same thing again tomorrow and fly the same thing again the day after that. So we, and by we I speak broadly, I mean both Virgin Galactic and our friends at Scale Composites, have built the first vehicle pair. We use an air launch system, so we have both an aircraft that carries our spaceship up to altitude and the spaceship itself. We built the vehicle, the first pair, the first of each vehicle. They're in the flight test program now. As many of you have heard me say, we're essentially done with the flight test program for the mothership, or whatever. Here we are. All right, I'll just do the 1-minute introduction of each of us, and then maybe, hell, let's just move straight to the questions. That seems most interesting to me. I'm happy to babble. I could
Why don't you talk
babble
a
for
few
a
minutes
long
about
time.
Virgin and how you're doing,
Sure.
and then I'll
Do
sort
the
of
same.
give them a quick intro to Export
Yeah.
as well.
Okay, well, hi, I think I know essentially all of you in the audience, but for those of you I haven't met yet, I look forward to meeting you later in the evening and throughout the weekend. My name's Will Pomerantz. I'm Vice President for Special Projects at Virgin Galactic. I am also a SEDS alum, having run a chapter for a couple of years and remained involved with the program ever since. Always happy to speak to SEDS students, whether at conferences or offline. You all said you all raised your hands and said you've heard of Virgin Galactic, but in case there's anyone on the web stream that hasn't, we are a private company that is building spaceships to take you and your experiments into space. So what we did is licensed the technology that built Spaceship One. That was the first ever